Welcome to another episode of Globetrot in 5. I'm Rudranil Ghosh, and in this episode, we are going to analyze the latest meeting between Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and US President Donald Trump. For the past weekend, Zelenskyy and Trump met in the US for their latest meeting to try and end the war in Ukraine. Well, over the past year, Zelenskyy and Trump have had several such meetings, some of them more acrimonious than others, like the one in February where Zelenskyy and Trump got into a heated argument over how best to end the war in Ukraine. However, over subsequent meetings, their relationship seems to have been sort of professionalized and, if not perfect, Zelenskyy and Trump are getting along somewhat to try and figure out how to end this war. Of course, ending the Ukraine war is no simple matter, given the complexities involved, and most importantly, given that Russia so far has showed no inclination whatsoever to actually end the war. Let us recall that these current round of talks between the Ukrainians and the Americans and the Europeans, on the other hand, are taking place against the backdrop of the 28-point peace plan that was unveiled by the Americans a month and a half ago. Those 28 points, frankly, were unacceptable to Ukraine because most of them were Russian talking points. In fact, it is suspected that those 28 points were directly handed over by the Russians to the Americans. And then the Americans forwarded the plan to the Europeans and the Ukrainians. However, since then, that 28-point plan has been revised. It's been brought down to 20 points, which are much more favorable for Ukraine. And it is on the basis of this 20-point framework agreement that the current round of talks are happening. However, the key issue here is, what does Russia want? Going by the battlefield situation, going by the fact that Russia continues to relentlessly bombard Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, Ukrainian schools, hospitals, energy infrastructure. It's relentlessly going after civilian assets in Ukraine. I don't think Russia has any inclination whatsoever to end this war. It wants to continue with this war because it feels that it has a good chance of gaining even more on the battlefield. Of course, whatever it is gaining, it is gaining at a very slow pace and at a huge cost because, thousands of Russian soldiers are dying every week just to gain a few square meters of territory. So this kind of medieval tactic that the Russian army is following is costing thousands of Russian lives every week. But of course, Russia is a big country and it has a much larger population than Ukraine's, and Ukraine is the victim here. It is the country that has been invaded. It is the victim, and they are fighting for their survival. They are fighting for their people, their own sovereignty, their own territory. So that is something that should not be lost sight of. So on the one hand, there is negotiation between Ukraine and the Americans to try and end this war. On the other hand, the Russians don't seem to be ready to negotiate in good faith. Of course, President Putin of Russia says in public, or rather says to Trump in public, that he wants this war to end, but his actions don't indicate that. His army continues to bombard Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, Ukrainian energy infrastructure. So there is no indication from Russia that it is ready to end its invasion of Ukraine. On top of that, the mediator here, that is Trump, is acting very, very strangely. I mean, instead of supporting Ukraine and standing with Ukraine, he has taken a position where he says that he is neutral, but actually he's helping Russia more than Ukraine.
Yeah. So, in your conversation with President Putin, did you discuss what responsibility Russia will have for any kind of reconstruction of Ukraine post an agreement?
I did. They're going to be helping. Russia's going to be helping. Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed. Once, it sounds a little strange, but I was explaining to the president, President Putin was very generous in his feeling toward Ukraine succeeding, including supplying energy, electricity, and other things at very low prices. So a lot of good things came out of that call today. But they were in the works for 2 weeks with Steve and with Jared and Marco and everybody.
And he says that he's doing this to end the war, but I think that Russia is getting a very different signal. Russia feels that they have someone in the White House who is sympathetic to their cause, and therefore they can string him along, keep telling him that yes, we are ready for peace, and buy time, and continue to press militarily on the battlefield. So they are essentially tapping Trump along, and Trump, for whatever reason, whether he's like sort of blinded by the prospect of future economic cooperation and business deals with Russia, or whether he is simply naive, one can't tell. But it seems that for whatever reason, he just doesn't seem to get it, that he is being strung along by the Russians and Putin. So why is Zelensky taking part in these talks? To be frank, Ukraine doesn't have a choice. It needs the United States. It needs Trump to be, if not, let's say, on Ukraine side, but at least in touch with the Ukrainian side. They don't want to lead. They don't want to lose the Americans. Therefore, Ukraine doesn't really have a choice but to sort of keep engaging the United States and keep them at least in contact, with Kiev and the needs of Kiev. So that is the strategy here from the Ukrainian side, and that's why I think the Ukrainians are participating in these talks, even though they probably feel that there is no quick end in sight to this war. So that's why, despite Russia's reluctance to end this war, Ukraine has been saying again and again they're willing to negotiate an end to this war, provided the conditions are there, the right conditions are there, and they have no choice but to sort of at least keep in touch with the Americans and not alienate the Americans here. So what did the latest round of talks between Trump and Zelensky achieve? Well, again, to be very honest, not much. Although there was a lot of enthusiasm both from Zelensky and Trump that progress has been achieved, that 90% of the deal is done. However, some major issues remain unaddressed, which is not surprising, because the two big issues are, number one, territorial concessions, potential territorial concessions by Ukraine to Russia, and number two, the control of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which has been occupied by the Russians. So these are two of the major issues that still remain unresolved. However, I mean, the other 90%, which Trump is very optimistic about, I mean, it still needs to be seen how those things will work, because without security guarantees for Ukraine, real security guarantees for Ukraine, I don't see how this war can end or a ceasefire can be achieved, there has to be real security guarantees, not on paper but on the ground. And what are those security guarantees? How do we get there? And how can they be implemented? All those things need to be seen to be believed. Because Ukraine has been here before with the Budapest Memorandum. It wasn't worth the paper it was written on. So Ukraine has to have real security guarantees this time for the war to end. But the Russians don't seem to want to give that to the Ukrainians. Like I said, I mean, they believe that they have someone in the White House who's sympathetic to their point of view, and they think that they can continue pressing and taking more Ukrainian territory on the battlefield. It's a classic war of attrition for them. And of course, sanctions on Russia, economic sanctions on Russia, have impacted Russia, but they haven't really crippled Russia. So that hasn't happened. So unless the Russian economy completely collapses, Russia probably feels that it's in a better position to continue this war and gain more Ukrainian territory. So this is where things are at, and it's difficult to see how an end to this Russia-Ukraine war can be achieved anytime soon. So, despite Trump's optimism about a deal to end the Russia-Ukraine war, I think that the war will continue for some more time. This is very unfortunate, of course. I would like to be proved wrong, but the way things are set up, it's unlikely that Russia will agree to stop this war anytime soon. And that therein lies the problem. I mean, if Russia plans to take the entire eastern Donbas region of Ukraine, then it has a solid military fortress on Ukrainian territory from which they could launch further invasions into Ukraine in a few years' time. They could even use that military fortress within Ukrainian soil to launch attacks and invasions on other countries in Europe. That's the fear that Europe has. So this is not going to be easy. This is not going to be easy. And no matter how Trump tries to put this, the two sides, Russia and Ukraine, are simply too far apart to do a deal at this moment. Again, nothing can be discounted in international diplomacy. I hope I'm proved wrong. I hope there is a ceasefire. I hope Russia stops bombing Ukrainian cities and civilians. Ukraine wants this war to end. It has said so several times. But unfortunately, things will continue the way they have been for the past 4 years, almost 4 years, for some more time. With that, I would like to end this episode of Globetrotting 5. See you in the new year.